The room smelled of ozone and metal polish, a sterile kind of scent that belonged in command decks and morgues. Across the massive viewing screen, the battle replay flickered to life again. Alien eyes, dozens of them, watched in silence, their strange, pupil-less gaze fixed on the grainy footage. The recording wasn't clean. Static rippled through every few seconds, like the battlefield itself had tried to fight back against the cameras. Explosions painted the frame in sudden bursts of orange, and shapes moved in the smoke, bodies, armor, shadows. And then there he was. At first you wouldn't notice him. He wasn't wearing any kind of special insignia, no marks of rank, just standard-issue combat armor, scratched and burned from use, the kind of man you'd think was just another body in the grinder. But the aliens kept rewinding, pausing, studying. They leaned forward whenever he appeared. He moved like a man who didn't care if he lived or died, charging through craters and broken steel, dragging wounded men to cover while returning fire without looking. His rifle never seemed to jam. His aim never wavered, even when the air was thick with dust and blood. The aliens didn't know his name. Hell, most of the soldiers fighting alongside him probably didn't either. He hadn't been part of any official unit, at least not in the kind of way command liked to record. But there was something else they saw in him. It wasn't just the kills. It wasn't just his stamina or his tactics. It was the way he refused to stop, the way he stood when everyone else was crawling. He wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like a man who had already lost everything and now wanted the enemy to feel the same. The alien commander, a tall insectoid figure with a segmented jaw, paused the footage. He leaned back, clicking his mandibles in thought. "This one," he said in his native tongue. "He is not ordinary." His second-in-command tilted her head, mandibles twitching. "A unit leader?" The commander's gaze sharpened. Number something worse. Back on Earth, the man in that footage sat alone in a dark barracks room, a half-empty bottle in front of him. He had no idea that somewhere in deep space, his face was being studied. No idea that an alien empire now had his name circled in red on their intelligence files. He thought the battle was over. He thought the war had moved on. He didn't know that to them. He was already a legend. The rain had been coming down for hours, hammering the roof of the barracks like 1,000 tiny fists. He sat at the metal table, head bowed, one hand wrapped around the neck of the bottle. The label had long been peeled away, leaving only glass slick with condensation. His other hand toyed with a coin, sliding it back and forth along the tabletop. He didn't drink to get drunk anymore. Drunk was a luxury, something you did to forget the day, not to forget the entire weight of your life. He drank because the silence was worse without it. Outside, the floodlights hummed, throwing pale circles on the mud. Every now and then, boots splashed through puddles, young soldiers, new ones, laughing too loud as if the war was still just a rumor to them. He'd been like that once, before the siege, before the bodies, before he learned that some wars never ended, even if the shooting stopped. He thought about the faces. They came uninvited. Always did. Men he'd fought beside, men he'd lost, men who had screamed his name in the chaos because somehow, for some reason, they thought he could pull them out of it alive. He couldn't save them all. Hell, he hadn't saved most of them. The door creaked open, and someone stepped inside. Not a soldier. He could tell by the weight of the footsteps. Civilian shoes. Polished. Hesitant. He didn't look up. "You lost?" The voice was smooth, clipped, controlled. "You're harder to find than I expected." "That's the point." He poured another shot and tossed it back without flinching. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." "I'm not here to sell." Something in the tone made him finally glance up. The man standing there wore a long, dark coat, still dripping from the rain. His hair was neat, his face pale under the fluorescent light. He didn't carry himself like a soldier, but there was a certain stillness about him, the kind that came from being comfortable around danger. "You were at Cinderfield," the man said. The coin stopped moving under his fingers. "You read the after-action report?" The stranger's mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. "Number, I've seen the footage." He stared at the man for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. "Who are you?" "My name doesn't matter. What matters is that other eyes have seen it too. Eyes you don't want watching." Something cold settled in his gut. He'd been careful. No media interviews, no commendations. The brass had offered him a medal once. He'd turned it down, told them to give it to someone dead who'd earned it more. He'd thought he'd buried his name in the mud of that battlefield. Apparently not. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They're not human, not from here, and they're looking for you." For a second, the words didn't register. They sounded too absurd to even process. But the look in the stranger's eyes. That wasn't a look you could fake. "You're serious." "Deadly." He leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "Why me?" The stranger's gaze didn't waver. "Because you did something out there that scared them. And if they're scared, they're going to want to remove you before they come back." The rain outside seemed louder suddenly, a steady, pounding drumbeat. "Then let them try," he said finally, voice low. The stranger didn't flinch. "They will. And they won't come at you like soldiers. They'll come like shadows, like whispers. And by the time you realize they're here, they'll already have everything they need to make you disappear." He poured another drink, but didn't touch it. His hands were steady, but inside something old and dangerous was waking up. It had been buried since the siege, locked away with the rage and the grief. But if someone was coming for him, maybe it was time to let it out again. 2 sectors away, aboard the Vrathis, a warship carved from black alloy and lit by thin veins of blue energy, the alien commander replayed the footage once more. The human in the recording was framed in dust and flame, moving with that reckless, calculated fury that had made the commander pause the first time he saw it. His second-in-command clicked her mandibles. "We have his location. Earth quadrant. Outskirts." "Good." The commander rose from his seat, towering over the crew pit. His limbs were long, jointed like a predator insect. "We will not approach openly. This one must not know he is being hunted." "What is the plan?" The commander's gaze darkened. "We watch, we learn, then we remove." Back on Earth, the stranger in the coat left without giving his name, leaving only a slip of paper with a set of numbers. Coordinates. "If you want to know the truth," he'd said before vanishing into the rain, "go here. Don't take anyone with you, and don't tell them you're coming." The paper sat on the table for a long while after he left. The rain kept falling. Somewhere outside, a truck rumbled past, headlights flashing briefly through the dusty window. He stared at the coordinates until his drink went warm. Then he tucked the paper into his pocket. If there was one thing he hated, it was being hunted. 3 days later, he was on the road. No convoy, no backup. Just him, a duffel bag, and a beat-up civilian vehicle with a full tank of gas. The coordinates led him far from the city, past farms gone to seed, past abandoned gas stations with rusted pumps leaning like drunkards. The land grew emptier the farther he drove. By the time he reached the point on the map, the sun was setting in a smear of blood-orange light. What waited for him was nothing, just a wide stretch of flat dirt, with the remains of an old listening post half buried in weeds. He parked, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled of dust and old rain. Then he heard it, not the wind, not an animal, something else. A low, almost electrical hum coming from the ground beneath his boots. He crouched, pressing a hand to the dirt. The vibration was faint, but it was there. He followed it towards the collapsed structure until he found a hatch, metal, square, half hidden under a sheet of corrugated tin. It wasn't locked. The hatch opened into a narrow shaft, the ladder slick with age. He climbed down slowly, listening. At the bottom was a corridor lit by dim strips of flickering light. The hum was louder here. The air was cold, stale. He moved forward, boots quiet on the concrete. The corridor bent sharply left, then opened into a room that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust lay thick on every surface, except one. In the center of the room was a table, and on it, a small black device, no bigger than a shoebox. It pulsed faintly with a blue light. He approached it cautiously. The moment he touched it, the hum spiked. A holographic image flared to life above the box, grainy at first, then sharpening into focus. His own face stared back at him. Not as he was now, but as he had been in the footage. Helmet half cracked, eyes wild, mouth set in a grim line as he tore through the battlefield. The image shifted. Alien text scrolled past. A new image appeared. An alien commander, the same one from the Vrathis, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. But the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a message, it was a warning. He shut the device off and stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding. If they had this, if they were watching him like this, then the stranger had been right. They were already here. That night, as he drove back toward the city, he saw the first shadow in his rearview mirror. A dark vehicle, no headlights, keeping its distance. He didn't speed up, didn't let on that he'd noticed. That night, as he drove back toward the city, he saw the first shadow in his rearview mirror. A dark vehicle, no headlights, keeping its distance. He didn't speed up, didn't let on that he'd noticed. But inside, something settled into place, the old instincts, the old fire. If they wanted him, they were going to have to come and take him, and they'd find out the hard way what kind of man they were chasing. The dark vehicle followed him for 57 miles. It never closed the gap, never slowed enough to be overtaken, just stayed there, steady as a shadow. He counted the rhythm of its headlights in the distance. 2 quick flickers when it hit a bump in the road, then smooth again. The kind of steady pursuit you only saw from trained operators. When he finally turned off the main road, the vehicle did the same. By the time the lights of the city came into view, he knew he couldn't just drive home. If they were this patient, they weren't looking for a confrontation. They wanted to watch, learn his habits, find the perfect moment to strike. That wouldn't happen. He made 3 quick turns through narrow back streets, then cut his headlights and slid the car into an alley behind an abandoned warehouse. He killed the engine and sat still, watching the entrance to the alley in the rearview mirror. 2 minutes later, the dark vehicle rolled slowly past. It was unmarked, civilian shape, but wrong. Too clean, too perfect. The paint had no chips, no dirt from the rain earlier that week. Even the tires looked fresh, like they'd just rolled off the line. He let it pass, counted to 10, then slipped out of the car. The duffel bag came with him. Inside were the same tools he'd kept since the war. Not medals, not souvenirs. Tools. A suppressed sidearm. A fixed blade knife with the black finish worn down to bare steel along the edges. A coil of paracord. Flashlight. Spare mags. The city was quiet this time of night. Neon signs glowed over empty sidewalks. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. He moved fast, taking a parallel street to where the vehicle had gone. He caught sight of it 2 blocks ahead, stopped at a red light. The windows were tinted black, but in the glow of the street lamp he saw movement inside. 3 shapes, too still to be civilians. When the light turned green, they kept going, heading toward the industrial quarter near the river. He followed on foot, keeping to the shadows, cutting through alleys and side streets until they finally pulled into a fenced lot behind an old shipping depot. The fence had fresh padlocks, security cameras on the corners. Inside the lot, the vehicle rolled into one of the warehouses. He waited until the sound of the engine faded, then circled around. The warehouse door was steel, locked tight, but one of the side windows was cracked just enough to pry open. Inside, the air smelled of oil and cold metal. He crouched in the shadows, eyes adjusting. The 3 figures from the vehicle were inside, standing around a table. But they weren't like the men he'd fought beside in the war. Their movements were wrong, too smooth. Deliberate, but not human deliberate. The way they turned their heads, sharp, bird-like, made something crawl along his spine. On the table was the same black device he'd seen in the listening post. They were speaking, but not in English. The words were liquid, fast, layered in tones no human throat could make. He couldn't understand them, but he understood the intent. The way they tapped the holographic display, zooming in on his face, marking locations on a map of the city. They were planning. One of them reached under the table and pulled out something that looked like a rifle. Sleek, alien, but with a grip and stock modified for human use. That's when he knew for sure. These weren't just alien observers. These were their human-suited hunters. He slipped back out the window, heart steady, movements quiet. By the time he reached his car again, the plan was forming in his head. The coordinates they'd marked on the map weren't random. They were choke points, routes in and out of the city. If they were planning to box him in, they'd expect him to run. So he wouldn't run. He'd hit them first. The first one went down at 3:14 a.m. The hunter had been stationed in a narrow alley, leaning against the wall, scanning the street with an unblinking calm. His alien-modded rifle hung across his chest, finger resting near, but not on, the trigger. The man from the footage stepped out of the darkness behind him, one hand wrapping around his mouth, the other sliding the blade cleanly across his throat. The hunter went limp without a sound. He dragged the body into a dumpster, stripped the rifle, and kept moving. The second one spotted him, but only for a second. She was posted near a service tunnel entrance by the river, the moonlight catching on the unnatural sheen of her skin. When she turned, he saw the faint, jagged line along her neck, like a scar from a surgery that had gone far too deep. She raised her weapon, but he was already moving. The shot went wide, sparking off the concrete. He closed the distance, slamming her into the wall so hard the impact echoed. Her weapon clattered to the ground. He saw her eyes up close then, dark, too deep set and shifting faintly, like ink swirling in water. He didn't hesitate. One hard twist of the knife, and she went still. By the time he reached the third, the hunters knew something was wrong. The last one wasn't at his post anymore. The vehicle from earlier was gone. He tracked him by instinct. Footprints in the damp dust, a faint smell of that alien oil from the rifle's mechanism. It led him back toward the warehouse, but this time, the lights inside were off. He moved in slow, every step deliberate. The black device was still on the table, but it was different now, its light pulsing faster. Before he could cross the room, the device flared and a voice filled the space. Not human. Not even pretending to be. "We see you, soldier!" He froze. The voice was layered, deep and cold, every syllable sinking into his bones. "You think this is a hunt? It is not. It is a test." The hologram shifted, and the alien commander's face appeared, his segmented jaw working as he studied him. "You survived Cinderfield. You killed more of my warriors than any human I have seen. I wanted to know why." He said nothing, just stared. The commander tilted his head, mandibles clicking softly. "Now I know. You are not like the others. You are what they could become." The image leaned closer. "That is why I cannot let you live." The hologram cut out. Somewhere in the darkness above him, something moved. Heavy. Purposeful. He dove to the side as a shape dropped from the rafters. A full alien form this time. No human disguise. Tall, armored in living chitin, with those black, glassy eyes that reflected nothing. The fight was short and brutal. The alien moved fast, but not fast enough. He ducked under a clawed strike, drove the blade into the joint under its arm, then ripped it free and drove it up under the chin. It convulsed once, then collapsed, the weight of it shaking the floor. He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, the warehouse silent again. Then he picked up the black device, slipped it into his duffel, and walked out into the cold night. If they'd wanted a test, they'd gotten their answer, and now he knew exactly what they feared. The sky was still black when he reached the edge of the city, but the streets already felt wrong. It wasn't the usual quiet before dawn. This was heavier, like the air itself had been pinned down. The streetlights flickered in uneven patterns. Power lines hummed a little too loud. Even the dogs that usually barked from behind fences stayed silent. They were here. He didn't need to see them to know. That kind of stillness wasn't natural. It was the same he'd felt before an artillery barrage in Cinderfield, when the enemy was already in position, waiting for the order. Only now, the artillery wasn't shells. The black device from the warehouse sat on the passenger seat, dark and inert since he'd taken it. He'd tried smashing it, but the damn thing was tougher than steel. He didn't trust it, but he couldn't leave it behind either. He parked in the shadows under an overpass and killed the lights. The duffel was on the floor by his feet. Everything inside was ready. Rifle, knife, spare mags, the last fragmentation grenades he'd kept from the war. If they wanted to come for him, they'd have to do it here, on his ground. On the Vrathis, the alien commander stood over a glowing tactical display. The holographic map of the city rotated slowly, dotted with red points marking hunter positions. "Phase 1 complete," his second-in-command reported. "We have locked down every exit route. No human forces are aware of our presence. Local communications are already compromised." The commander's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. "Good. Deploy the primary kill team." "They will engage with human-compatible weaponry?" "Yes, no trace. If the Terran government suspect an off-world hand, the prey will be harder to catch." The commander's gaze hardened. This human must be erased quietly. No public spectacle. He saw them first at 5:42 a.m. A black van turned the corner 2 blocks away, its windows just as dark as the one from before. Another vehicle flanked it, a civilian pickup, but with the suspension too stiff and the stance too low. Military weight under a civilian shell. He slipped out of the car and moved into the shadows. The overpass pillars gave him cover, but he knew they'd sweep this area fast. The first pair came in on foot. They looked human, but their movements gave them away. Too controlled, too in sync with each other. The rifles they carried weren't standard issue. They were smooth, no visible safety, no markings. He let them pass, then stepped out behind the last one. The knife went in under the ribs, up through the lung. He clamped a hand over the man's mouth, lowered him silently to the ground, then melted back into the dark. The other turned just in time to see the body hit the pavement. He brought his rifle up. Too slow. The suppressed pistol barked once, and he dropped without a sound. The van door slammed open and 4 more came out. This time they didn't bother pretending to be human. Their eyes shifted in the dark, skin rippling faintly under the dim streetlights. He was already moving, weaving between concrete pillars. The first burst of fire chewed chunks out of the pillar he'd just left. He dropped prone, rolled, came up on one knee, and put 2 rounds into the lead hunter's chest. The alien staggered but didn't fall. The second burst came from the side. One of them had flanked him. He dove behind a support beam, heard rounds skip off the concrete, then pulled a grenade from his vest. The pin came out with a practiced twist of the thumb. He lobbed it low, bouncing it once off the pillar so it rolled right between the 2 closest hunters. The blast was short, hard, and final. When the dust cleared, both were down. The last one in the open didn't run. He charged. 7 feet of alien muscle, claws out, eyes black as oil. The impact knocked him off his feet, the rifle skidding away across the pavement. He felt claws rake across his vest, tearing fabric and grazing skin. He jammed the knife up under the alien's chin, felt it bite into something soft, then twisted. Hot, black fluid sprayed across his arm. The alien let out a sound like metal scraping over stone, then collapsed. By the time the shooting stopped, the van was gone. They'd pulled out, but not in retreat. This was just the first push. He knew what came next. They'd regroup, bring heavier firepower, maybe more of the full alien forms. And if he stayed here, they'd just tighten the net. He tossed the black device onto the hood of a wrecked car and stared at it. The thing sat there, pulsing faintly, as if mocking him. "What do you want from me?" he muttered. It came to life instantly. The alien commander's face filled the air above it, mandibles twitching. "You should have run," the voice said. He stared back. "You should have brought more men." The commander's eyes narrowed. "You cannot win this." "Maybe not," he said. "But I can make sure you remember my name." He picked up the device, slammed it into the pavement, and stomped it until the light went out. The next 48 hours were a blur of movement. He didn't stay in one place for more than an hour. He raided old safe houses from the war, pulling gear from caches even he'd almost forgotten about. Claymores, more grenades, extra ammo. He hit them where they weren't ready. A sniper shot through the windshield of a hunter vehicle as it crossed a bridge. A pipe bomb in the trunk of a parked car that went up just as a kill team passed. By the end of the second night, they weren't hunting him anymore. They were reacting to him. On the Vrathis, the commander's patience began to crack. "Losses are unacceptable," he growled. "He is one human. One. And you cannot remove him from the field?" His second-in-command bowed her head. "He does not fight like the others. He does not defend. He strikes. He moves faster than expected. He adapts." The commander's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Then we send the war form." Her eyes widened. "Here? On their world?" "Yes." His voice was final. "No more subtlety. No more shadows. We break him in the open." By the time dawn broke on the 3rd day, he was ready for them. He'd chosen his ground, an abandoned industrial park on the edge of the city. Wide open lines of sight, plenty of cover, and enough preset explosives to make the place a minefield. The first sign of them was the low, thrumming hum in the air. Then it came over the rooftops. It wasn't a vehicle. It wasn't a man. It was something else entirely. 10 feet tall, armored in overlapping plates that shimmered faintly, carrying a weapon that looked more like a piece of artillery than a rifle. the war form. It landed in the center of the yard with a sound like steel crushing steel. The ground shuddered. He stayed still, crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching. The thing's head turned slowly, scanning, the weapon's barrel tracking with it. The first claymore went off as soon as it stepped forward. Shrapnel tore into its armor, sparking, but didn't drop it. It roared, a deep, bone-vibrating sound, and charged toward the blast. He moved fast, circling, staying low. The second mine went off under its left leg, forcing it to stumble. That was his chance. He came in from the side, rifle up, and emptied a full magazine into the joint at the back of its knee. The rounds sparked and pinged, but some bit deep. The warform staggered, then swung the massive weapon toward him. The blast was a wall of heat and light. It missed, but the shockwave slammed him into the container, knocking the air from his lungs. He rolled, came up with the knife in hand, and dove under its guard. The blade found a seam in the armor, sliding in deep. The warform bellowed, swinging wildly. He kept stabbing, over and over, until the black fluid gushed over his arms and the thing collapsed, shuddering. When it stopped moving, he stood there, breathing hard, covered in alien blood. Above, the sky was still dark, but he could feel it. Eyes watching. If the commander wanted him dead, he'd have to come down here himself. And if he did, he wouldn't be going back up. The warform's corpse was still cooling when the first drops of rain began to fall. They hissed on the alien's black armor, running in rivulets through cracks and shrapnel holes. Steam rose in faint curls, mixing with the metallic stench of its blood. He stood over it, chest heaving, eyes scanning the rooftops. Nothing moved. No kill team emerged to reclaim the body. That was wrong. He'd been fighting these things long enough to know they never left their dead behind. Not because they cared, but because they didn't want humans getting a closer look. This wasn't an oversight. This was bait. Up on the Virah the alien commander watched the scene unfold in a shimmering projection. The warform lay broken in the industrial yard. The human stood beside it, still and watchful. "He has proven himself," the commander said, voice low. His second-in-command kept her gaze on the projection. "Shall we extract him?" "No," the commander said. "We will descend. I will see him myself." Her mandibles twitched. "That is not protocol." "Protocol is for prey that runs," the commander said. "This one does not run. He is dangerous enough to warrant my hand." He stepped away from the display, his armor plates shifting with each deliberate movement. "Prepare the personal guard. We hunt." By the time the dropship came into view over the city, he was gone from the yard. He'd taken everything useful from the warform's body. Armor plating from the joints, a fragment of the weapon's casing, a small vial of the black fluid. He didn't know exactly what he'd do with them yet, but his instincts told him they'd matter later. The rain picked up, turning streets into slick ribbons of light. The industrial park was a maze of blind corners and shadowed alleys, and he used every one of them. He knew the dropship wasn't here to collect a corpse. It was here for him, and if the commander was bold or arrogant enough to come down himself, then this wasn't just a fight. This was an opportunity. He made his way to one of his oldest caches, hidden in the remains of a collapsed building from the early days of the war. Inside, under warped sheet metal and rotting beams, was a waterproof crate. He cracked it open. Inside was the kind of firepower you didn't use unless you didn't care about making noise: 2 drum-fed shotguns, a half-dozen pipe bombs, and a sniper rifle he'd built himself from scavenged parts. The barrel was long, heavy, and ugly, but it hit harder than anything the army had issued. He loaded the rifle, slung it over his back, and started thinking like a hunter instead of prey. If the commander wanted to walk into the city, then he'd need somewhere secure to land. Somewhere with wide space for the dropship, defensible angles, and enough open ground to discourage a human ambush. There were only 3 such places in this part of the city. He went to the highest of them. From the rooftop of a half-collapsed office tower, he saw the dropship settle into the ruins of an old stadium. The rain sheeted over its dark, insect-like hull. The personal guard came first, 8 of them, larger than the human-suited hunters but smaller than the war form. Each carried a long, spear-like weapon that doubled as a rifle. They moved in a diamond formation, securing the perimeter. Then the commander stepped out. He was taller than the others, his armor a deep obsidian marked with faint silver etchings. His mandibles clicked softly as he scanned the stadium, and for the first time, the man from Cinderfield saw him without the distortion of a hologram. Even at this distance, he felt the weight of that gaze. He stayed low, moving along the rooftop to line up a shot. The guard was disciplined, always 2 keeping eyes on the commander while the others scanned outward. No clean opening. He didn't fire. Not yet. Instead, he shifted his attention to the dropship. Its engines were still hot, venting steam into the rain. Through the cockpit canopy, he saw 2 pilots, less armored, focused on their controls. He adjusted his aim. One shot cracked through the rain, and the pilot's head snapped back in a spray of dark fluid. The second shot came before the body slumped, taking the other through the chest. The commander's head whipped toward the sound. The guard moved instantly, half turning to shield him, half scanning the rooftops. He was already gone. The stadium hunt began immediately. The guard spread out, moving with a precision that told him they'd done this before. But the city wasn't theirs. It was his. He led them away from the commander, 1 pair at a time. A flash of movement at a street corner drew 2 into a narrow alley, where a pipe bomb hidden under a trash bin took them apart in a single echoing blast. The next 2 caught him on a fire escape, but the shotgun roared twice, and they went down hard. The rain turned red in the gutter. By the time 4 of the guards were down, the commander had stopped sending them in pairs. He came himself. The first he knew of it was the sound. The commander's armor didn't just clink or scrape like the others. It resonated, a deep, almost subsonic hum that he felt in his chest. He was moving down a narrow service tunnel under the stadium when the hum grew louder. The air itself seemed to press inward. Then the commander stepped into the light at the far end of the tunnel. Up close, the alien was even larger, easily 8 feet, the armor's etched lines glowing faintly in the gloom. The spear weapon in his hand was longer than the man's body. "You fight well," the commander said in perfect, unaccented English. The man didn't answer. "You remind me of my kind," the commander continued. "We respect strength, but you are alone. You cannot—" The shotgun boomed once, cutting him off. The slug slammed into the commander's chest, making him stagger a half step. The armor smoked, but didn't break. The commander straightened slowly. "Good," he said. "Make me earn this." The fight was brutal from the first moment. The commander's spear lashed out, faster than anything that size had a right to move. He ducked under the first swing, felt the wind of the second pass inches from his skull, and answered with another shotgun blast to the thigh. The alien didn't slow. A backhand strike sent him crashing into the tunnel wall, the impact rattling his teeth. He rolled as the spear slammed into the concrete where he'd been, showering sparks. He drew the knife, aiming for the same joint gaps that had dropped the war form, but the commander moved with a predator's instinct, turning the blade aside with the shaft of the spear. They circled in the tight space, rainwater dripping through cracks above. His breathing was ragged, but the commander's was steady, almost calm. "You fight for your life," the alien said. "I fight for the right to erase you." He spat blood onto the floor. "Then you're going to have to try harder." The next exchange was a blur. He ducked low, slashed at the back of the alien's knee, and was rewarded with a flash of dark fluid. The commander roared, swinging down in a killing blow, but the man twisted aside and drove the knife up under the armpit into softer flesh. The alien staggered, but instead of retreating, he caught the man by the vest and slammed him into the wall hard enough to crack concrete. The world went white for a second. When his vision cleared, the spear's point was inches from his throat. Then the commander hesitated. Not long, just enough for the man to see it. And in that hesitation he drove the knife into the alien's side, buried to the hilt, and ripped it free in a hard, tearing motion. The commander's roar was deafening in the tunnel. He swung the spear wildly, and the man ducked, rolling clear as the weapon smashed into the floor. He didn't wait. The last grenade came out of his vest, pin pulled with his teeth. He shoved it into the gap in the alien's thigh armor and kicked off hard, diving back. The blast filled the tunnel with heat and smoke. When it cleared, the commander was on one knee, armor cracked, fluid pouring from the wound. The man stood over him, breathing hard. "Looks like you bleed after all." The commander's black eyes locked on him. "This is not the end." "Yeah," he said. "It is." The knife came down once, clean, through the alien's throat. The hum of the armor faded into silence. The dropship never lifted off again. By the time the rain stopped, the stadium was empty except for the dead. And somewhere far above Earth, on another ship, the absence of their commander began to ripple through the alien ranks. They had sent their best to kill a human, and that human had sent their best back in pieces. The stadium smelled of burnt ozone and blood. He hadn't slept since the fight in the tunnel. The commander's body still lay where it had fallen, armor cracked, fluid pooled beneath it. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and damp. He knew better than to think this was the end. Killing the commander wasn't a victory. It was a declaration, a challenge, and an alien empire wasn't going to let something like that stand. Somewhere above the clouds, there were ships, not one, not two, dozens, maybe more. At dawn, the first sign came. The comms tower at the center of the city lit up, then went dead. Every phone, every radio frequency, every broadcast signal cut to black in the same second. Then the sky began to hum. Not a sound like engines, not the low thrum of dropships. This was deeper. A rolling vibration that settled into the bones. He stepped out of the stadium's shadow and looked up. High in the atmosphere, faint glimmers moved against the pale morning light, lines of silver cutting through the clouds. Fleet. Up on the Vra, chaos rippled through the crew. The commander's armor had been returned in pieces. His second-in-command now stood at the center of the war table, mandibles clicking in controlled fury. "We will not be made weak by this," she hissed. "Prepare the cleansing." A junior officer hesitated. "Direct bombardment will reveal our presence to all Terrans." "Then let them know," she snapped. "Let them know what defiance costs." She turned her gaze to the tactical projection, focusing on the city where the commander had fallen. "We erase it. Every building, every street, every living thing." Back on Earth, he moved through the empty streets, eyes scanning every rooftop and shadow. The city was already changing. Storefronts shuttered, cars abandoned in the middle of the road. People were leaving in a hurry, those who could. Those who couldn't were locking themselves in basements, praying whatever was coming wouldn't find them. He didn't pray. He scavenged. A small garage yielded an old military truck, half stripped for parts but still running. In the back, under a tarp, was a crate of anti-tank mines, rusty but usable. He loaded them in, along with whatever food, water, and ammunition he could find. He wasn't thinking about escape. He was thinking about how to make them pay. By mid-afternoon, he had a plan. The mines went into the main approaches to the city. Choke points, intersections, underpasses. He wasn't trying to stop the fleet from landing. He knew he couldn't. He was trying to make them bleed for every step they took. The first ship came through the clouds just before sunset. It was bigger than anything he'd seen before. More fortress than vessel. Black metal plated in jagged, overlapping armor. Its shadow stretched across half the city. Smaller craft poured out from its flanks, fanning into formation. He watched from a rooftop as they descended. The first mine detonated 2 streets over, the blast echoing like a thunderclap. A second followed moments later, throwing one of the smaller craft into a spinning crash. It wasn't enough to stop them. By nightfall, the aliens were on the ground. They didn't send human-suited hunters this time. These were full combat forms, armored, fast, and built for shock assault. They moved in squads, weapons spitting arcs of white energy that cut through concrete like paper. He stayed ahead of them, moving through side streets, striking only when he had an opening. A sniper round from the shadows to drop a squad leader. A grenade tossed from a second-story window into a formation passing below. Each hit slowed them, but didn't stop them. The fleet's second ship was already descending. It was around midnight when he found survivors. 3 men and a woman holed up in the basement of a burned-out apartment building. They were armed, but barely. Old shotguns, a revolver, 1 hunting rifle. When they saw him, their eyes widened. "You're him," the older man said. "The one from the footage. The one they're after." He didn't answer. Just checked their weapons. They were low on ammo, but they had grit. That was something. "You want to live," he said. "You follow my lead. No noise unless you're shooting. No standing still. Move when I move." They didn't argue. They fought together for the next 2 hours, moving from building to building, keeping the aliens from tightening their hold on the city center. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't pretty, but it worked. Every alien squad they hit pulled more forces in their direction, buying the rest of the city time to scatter. But the fleet wasn't slowing down. By 3 a.m., the third ship had entered the atmosphere. On the Vra, the second-in-command, watched the feed from ground forces. Losses were higher than expected. "This is his work," one of the officers said. She tilted her head, mandibles twitching. "Then we burn him out. Bring the fire." A ripple of agreement moved through the command deck. The cleansing would begin at dawn. He knew it was coming before the first light hit the horizon. The sound changed. The hum became a roar. He looked up and saw the fleet shifting position, ships pulling back just enough to line up. They weren't just going to kill him. They were going to level the city. He gathered the survivors in the shadow of a collapsed bridge. "They're going to hit the whole city," he said. "Orbital bombardment. Nothing left standing." The younger man shook his head. "Then we run." "No," he said. "We make them miss." The plan was insane. The largest of the alien ships was the one directly above the city center, and it would be the one to fire first. If they could damage its targeting array, if they could blind it, it might throw off the bombardment long enough for more people to escape. The problem was that the array was on the underside of the ship, and the only way to reach it from the ground was to get into one of the smaller craft and fly up, which meant stealing one. They hit the alien staging ground at 5:12 a.m. The fight was short, brutal, and loud. Energy fire lit the dawn as they cut through the guards, 2 of the survivors going down before they even reached the nearest craft. He and the woman climbed inside, sealing the hatch behind them. The controls were alien, but he didn't need to know how to fly it perfectly, just enough to aim up and go. The craft rose, jerking hard at first, then smoothing out as the engines caught. The city fell away beneath them, streets glowing with the flicker of ongoing firefights. The underside of the flagship loomed above, black metal stretching across the sky. He aimed for the cluster of structures near its center, the targeting array. Energy fire streaked past them as alien fighters moved in to intercept. The woman leaned out of the side hatch with the stolen rifle, dropping one before it could close the distance. They reached the array just as alarms began to howl through the craft. He planted the last of his grenades in the seams between the array's plates, setting the timers for 30 seconds. By the time the first fighter got a clean shot, they were already diving away. The explosions ripped through the underside of the flagship, fire and shrapnel billowing out into the dawn. From the streets below, survivors saw the flagship stagger in the sky, its main cannon flickering, then going dark. The bombardment never came. They landed hard, skidding across cracked pavement, the craft's engine screaming before dying completely. The woman limped out, smoke rising from her jacket where a near miss had grazed her. He stepped out after her, looking up at the sky. The fleet was still there, still dangerous. But they'd been hit, and they knew it. And if they knew anything about him by now, they knew he wouldn't stop. The sky never cleared after the attack on the flagship. Thick, bruised clouds hung over the city, lit from above by the glow of the alien fleet. The flagship had pulled back, drifting like a wounded predator, its damaged underbelly hidden from view. The other ships stayed in formation, smaller vessels dropping into the streets below to secure their foothold. They thought they could hold the city. They didn't understand that the city was already gone. By dawn, most of the civilians who could flee had already done it. Highways clogged with abandoned cars told the rest of the story. Engines dead from EMP bursts, people forced to run on foot. The man from Cinderfield moved among them only briefly. He'd gotten the survivors from the bridge out during the night, guiding them through side roads and service tunnels until they reached the hills outside the city. They were exhausted, hollow-eyed, and hungry, but they were alive. The woman, Clark, was still with him. She didn't talk much, but she followed without hesitation. She'd been steady in the stolen craft, steady in the firefights. He trusted her aim, if not yet her judgment. "You could leave," he told her, once they reached the tree line. "Follow the rest. Get somewhere safe." She just shook her head. "There's nowhere safe, and you're not done yet." They moved north through the woods, keeping low, avoiding the roads. By midday they reached an old ranger station, a squat concrete building with broken windows and a radio mast that had long since rusted through. He wasn't expecting to find anyone there. But there were 7. A mix of men and women, some barely out of their teens, all armed with whatever they could carry. Hunting rifles, pistols, even a crossbow. They were tired but alert, and when they saw him, recognition flashed in their eyes. One of the older men, beard streaked with gray, stepped forward. "We heard what you did in the city. Took down one of their ships." He didn't answer. "You're the one from the footage," the man pressed. "From the war, the one they talk about." "They talk too much," he said, brushing past into the building. Inside, maps of the surrounding area were spread across a table. The aliens had already taken the city, but their ground forces hadn't pushed far beyond it yet. That wouldn't last. "They'll come through here," he said, tapping the map where the main road cut between 2 ridges. "They'll want the high ground before they push north." The bearded man frowned. "We can't stop them. We've got 7 rifles and not enough ammo to hold off a squirrel, let alone—" "You don't stop them head on," he cut in. "You bleed them. Make them pay for every step. Force them to slow down until we have more bodies." The younger ones looked uncertain. Clark just crossed her arms and nodded. The next 3 days were all preparation. They stripped what they could from abandoned vehicles, fuel, batteries, wiring. The mines he'd brought from the city were buried under the soft dirt of the ridge road, concealed under fallen leaves. They dug firing pits along the tree line, positioned to catch any convoy from both sides. They even set deadfall traps, not for the aliens themselves, but for the smaller scout drones that moved ahead of the main force. He taught them how to move without being seen, how to hold their fire until the first man shot, how to keep moving after you killed, because standing still was death. The aliens came on the fourth morning. It started with the hum of their engines, faint at first, then building into a steady, stomach-deep vibration. Through the scope of his rifle, he saw them. 12 ground forms moving in a loose formation, flanking 2 wheeled carriers bristling with guns. The first mine took the lead carrier's front wheel. The explosion flipped it onto its side, crushing one of the ground forms beneath it. The firing started before the dust had even settled. From the tree line, his people opened up, rifle shots cracking, arrows whistling. The aliens returned fire with blinding white arcs that turned trees into splinters. He moved between firing positions, taking shots where they counted, joints, eyes, exposed throats. The rifle was heavy, the recoil sharp, but it hit hard enough to put even the big ones down. By the time the second carrier tried to turn back, another mine ripped through its undercarriage, sending it up in a fireball. The aliens pulled back after losing half their number, leaving the road littered with wreckage. They hadn't taken the ridge. That night, around the fire, the group was quieter than before, but not with fear. They'd seen it now. The aliens could be hurt, could be killed. For the first time since the invasion began, they believed that maybe, just maybe, they could win. The next weeks blurred into a constant grind. Word spread through the hills of the man from the footage, the one who fought the aliens like they were just another army to be broken. Small bands of survivors began to find them. Hunters, ex-soldiers, even a few police who'd gone to ground when the city fell. Each brought weapons, supplies, or just another pair of hands to dig trenches and lay traps. They were far from an army, but they were no longer just 7 scared people with old rifles. They were a resistance. The aliens noticed. The first time they tried to flush the hills, they came with twice as many troops as before, supported by low-flying drones armed with pulse cannons. They still didn't take the ridge. The second time, they came at night, slipping through the trees in total silence. But silence didn't save them from a wall of claymores. By the third attempt, they stopped coming in force at all. Instead, they sent scouts, small, fast, and nearly invisible in the dark. Those didn't last long either. The fleet adjusted. They stopped pushing directly north, instead moving east along the river, hitting smaller towns that didn't have anyone to defend them. The resistance followed, harassing them from the tree line, picking off stragglers, cutting supply lines. It wasn't enough to stop the destruction, but it slowed it. And slowing them bought time for more people to hear the stories, for more scattered fighters to make their way into the hills. By the time the leaves began to turn, they had over 100 fighters. Not soldiers. Most had never seen combat before this, but they could move, they could shoot, and they could follow orders. The man from Cinderfield didn't call himself their leader, but they did. One night, Clark found him sitting apart from the firelight, cleaning the long rifle. "They're saying your name now," she told him. He didn't look up. "Don't need them to. They do it anyway, because they believe it scares the aliens." He finished reassembling the rifle, slid the bolt forward. "It doesn't." She studied him for a moment. "It will." Far above, in the shadowed halls of the Vrathis, the second-in-command stood at the central display. Her claws tapped against the console as she watched the latest reports. Convoys lost, patrols wiped out, supply lines cut. "This is more than one human," one of her officers said. She didn't answer right away. The projection of the man's face, taken from the original battlefield footage, floated above the table. "Perhaps," she said finally, "but it is the same one who killed our commander, the same one who blindsided our flagship." She tilted her head, the faintest edge of curiosity in her voice. "Perhaps it is time to hunt him ourselves." The ridge was quiet before dawn. Too quiet. Even the wind through the trees seemed to hold its breath. The man from Cinderfield stood on the high ground with his rifle slung, scanning the black line of the forest below. The others were asleep in scattered tents, rifles within arm's reach. They trusted him to wake them if trouble came. It was already here. He'd seen the signs last night. Alien scout drones keeping just beyond range, holding their position instead of moving on. That wasn't recon, that was a cordon. He didn't know how many were coming, but he knew who. Up on the Vrathis, the second in command, now commander, in all but name, watched the Resistance's position in a floating projection. She'd waited long enough for her prey to gather his followers, for the legend to grow. Now she would break it. "This will be personal," she told her strike team, 8 elite warriors armored in segmented plates, each armed with a long spear rifle and blade claws. "You will not return until you bring me his head." The warriors hissed in unison, a predator's promise. The dropship came in low, cloaked until the last second. The first anyone in the camp knew of it was the roar of engines and the sudden downdraft tearing through the trees. He was already moving, kicking Clark's boot. "Up, all of you! Positions!" Rifles came up, men and women spilling out of tents, scattering to the firing pits along the ridge. The dropship set down just beyond the tree line, ramp slamming open. The strike team came out in formation, moving with the smooth, inhuman precision he'd seen in the commander's guard. And at the center was her, the alien commander's second. Taller than the others, armor etched in silver, mandibles clicking in a rhythm that sounded almost like a laugh. The first volley came from the tree line, rifle fire cracking through the cold air. 2 of the warriors went down under the opening barrage, their armor pierced at the joints. The rest didn't slow. They advanced up the slope in a steady, deliberate march, energy fire slashing through the air, cutting down 3 fighters before they could fall back. He moved along the ridge, firing twice from the long rifle, then shifting position before return fire could find him. One warrior's chest plate shattered under the first hit. Another lost its right arm to the second. But still, the line kept coming. Clark was in the trenches, working the bolt on her rifle with steady hands. Every shot was aimed, deliberate. She dropped one of the elites with a round through the eye, then shifted to cover a group of younger fighters trying to reload. The slope became chaos, mud kicked up by fire, the crack and hiss of gunfire mixing with alien roars. He kept moving, never letting them fix his position. And then she was there. The alien commander's second moved faster than he expected for her size, closing the distance between them in seconds. Her spear weapon slashed out, the blade end passing inches from his face as he dove aside. She followed immediately, a second strike forcing him to roll down the slope, mud soaking through his jacket. "You killed my predecessor," she said in perfect English, voice low and cold. "You think that makes you untouchable." He came up on one knee, firing the rifle point blank. The shot hit her square in the chest, knocking her back a step but not dropping her. "Not untouchable," he said, "just hard to kill." They closed again, the fight breaking away from the main line as the battle raged around them. Her reach with the spear was longer, forcing him to stay low and close the gap. Twice the blade caught him, once across the shoulder, once grazing his ribs, but both times he stayed on his feet. He waited for the opening, for the slight overreach that came when she pressed too hard. When it came, He stepped inside the spear's arc, driving the knife up under her arm into the softer flesh beneath the armor. She roared, slamming her free hand into his chest, sending him sprawling. On the ridge, the resistance was holding, but barely. Half their number were down, wounded or dead. The alien strike team was reduced to 3 besides their leader, but those 3 fought like entire squads, refusing to break. Clark was shouting orders, keeping the line tight, dragging the wounded back. The battle had slowed into short, vicious bursts of violence between moments of tense, breathless stillness. He came at the commander's second again, this time throwing a flash grenade between them. The detonation was blinding in the dim morning light, the shockwave making her stumble. He drove forward, ramming her into the trunk of a tree, blade working in short, brutal strikes at the seams of her armor. She caught his wrist on the 3rd strike, twisting until the knife clattered into the mud. "You fight well," she said, mandibles inches from his face. "But you are just a man." He gritted his teeth. "That's all it takes." He pulled the last weapon from his belt, a fragmentation grenade, and shoved it between them, pinning it against her chest with both hands. Her eyes widened. The blast ripped through them both, throwing him backward into the mud. His ears rang, vision swimming, but when he forced himself up, she was on the ground. Armor shattered, black fluid pooling beneath her. She reached for him once, then went still. The last 3 warriors broke when their leader fell. Clark and the others cut them down before they could retreat to the dropship. When the ridge was quiet again, the cost was clear. Too many bodies in the mud, too few still standing. He looked out over the forest, half expecting to see more dropships coming through the clouds. None came. For now. Far above, the Vrathis hung silent in orbit. The loss of another commander was more than a tactical defeat. It was a fracture in the chain of control. The alien fleet didn't move, didn't fire, didn't retaliate. Not yet. That night, around the fire, no one spoke for a long time. They were alive. They'd beaten the best the enemy had sent. But every one of them knew it wasn't over. The man from Cinderfield sat apart from the firelight, as he always did, cleaning the long rifle. Clark came to stand beside him. "You know they'll keep coming." "Good," he said. "Why good?" He looked at her, eyes steady in the flicker of the flames. "Because every time they do, the galaxy learns the same thing." He worked the bolt, the metal clicking into place. "That Earth doesn't roll over, not for anyone." The fleet stayed in orbit, watching. Waiting. Somewhere in their archives, the footage of Cinderfield had been replaced. Now the legend they studied was no longer just a soldier on a battlefield. It was the man who killed their commanders, the man who rallied the scattered into a force they couldn't break. And they all knew the truth. If they came for him again, they'd be looking at a legend,